Among the shelves of Eastern Connecticut University's library sits a small text titled Terminal Boredom. It's thin, resembling a pamphlet more than a proper book, but inside is a world of exploitation and ambivalence that tells the story of a woman disconnected from her own society. Suzuki Izumi was born to a family of small-time reporters in Shizuoka Prefecture in the south of Japan's mainland. Little is known about her early life other than her foray into literature after high school, where she won second place in the Shosetsu Gendai magazine's New Writers competition. While many would expect this development to lead to a fulfilling literary career, Suzuki instead turned towards pink films in order to make ends meet. Pink films, or socially permissible films defined by a bare-bones plot and the regular usage of female nudity in late 20th century Japanese culture, became a defining staple of Suzuki's artistic career, although later details of her work and life would suggest that the industry had subjected her to dark and tragic circumstances during her employment as an actress. Under the alias Naomi Asaka, Suzuki would star in several prominent pink films throughout the 1970s, later developing her skills as a director for the avant-garde Tenjo Sajiki theater group. As a playwright, her productions earned a modest level of respect from other members of the field, leading the troupe to present a regular Izumi Suzuki Avant-Garde Theater Week until she left the industry after marrying musician Kaoru Abe. Their marriage lasted a tumultuous 4 years before the couple divorced, with Abe taking custody of the couple's daughter, Azusa, before his fatal overdose in 1978. With no income and a child to rear, Suzuki re-entered the literary world as a speculative fiction author, selling her stories to magazines in order to provide for Azusa and herself. Suzuki's magnum opus, Terminal Boredom, is a collection of short stories revolving around the concepts of human connection and trauma. The future she presents within, as well as the vague technology that supplies them with an inkling of futurism, are nebulous and dark, but concurrently vicious and practical. One of the short stories within, Women and Women, tells the story of a desolated future in which Earth has been almost completely stripped of its resources, and men, being blamed for the resulting destitution, have been herded into gender-exclusion terminal occupancy zones, or ghettos for short. The protagonist, a middle school girl, then meets an escaped boy and is promptly sexually assaulted by him when he lures her into a building that he's been using as a safe house. The protagonist's confusion and the severity of her exploitation is exacerbated further when her grandmother replies, "Your mother did the same thing." Another tale, You May Dream, goes far beyond the sexual and instead investigates the limits of connection when one is completely unable to get somebody out of their head. The protagonist's friend is chosen for state-sponsored euthanasia, and requests for her personality to be surgically implanted into the protagonist's dreams. The resulting violation of privacy results in the protagonist being forced to kill her companion a second time, being unable to deal with the other person's lack of emotional boundaries. Ultimately, this results in the protagonist choosing to be euthanized of their own accord. Suzuki's involvement in the pornographic industry is only slightly hinted at with the inclusion of themes such as sexual exploitation and the desire for social isolation, and with how little is known about her personal life, speculation arises. With so many of her biographical details concealed by the cultural disregard for female authors in 20th century Japan, as well as her own secrecy, it falls into tertiary sources to draw connections about the author that can never be confirmed or denied. Perhaps there is a point to this. Perhaps Suzuki's troubled life and bleak, gritty works were meant to illustrate a portrait that mere interviews and blithe, objective recordings of a life could not. Suzuki later committed suicide by hanging at her home in 1986, following deteriorating health from an unspecified condition, leaving the rest to our interpretation. In conclusion, I leave you with a quote by Andrew Ridker. In Suzuki, where there is sex, there is exploitation. Where there are drugs, addiction. Only rock and roll remains unscathed. Alright, so, what can you tell me about incel daycare?
Uh, do you want me to go first?
Whoever.
It's definitely one of the most diverse cast of characters, we'll say. It's there's not really like a specific archetype. Um, Obviously, you have people in there that are like self-reported, like stereotypical what you would consider like incels, but there's like successful people in there. There's people that are good looking, there's people from all over the world actually within the server. There's people from a lot of different socioeconomic backgrounds as well. But they just kind of have a general sort of, I guess, aligned personality type to some degree, maybe internet persona-esque personality.
Okay.
Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean they're like that in real life, but they all kind of have, what I would say, not all of them, but a good majority have a very aggressive internet persona.
People can be quite harsh to each other, but I think it's mostly in kind of a good-hearted way.
Incel, involuntarily celibate. The term's been used as slang, a political alignment, accusation of terrorism, and a general verbal insult for the last few years. It draws people both deranged and downtrodden to its umbrella, and asks each of us what it means to be an individual who, through factors earned or not, cannot cope with being alone nor seek the comfort of another. But what really is an incel? Who are these people, and what do they want and believe? I entered a community of self described incels who claim to be in rehabilitation, and interviewed each to answer these questions. Incels have been around a lot longer than people realize, specifically since the 1700s when a Russian historical account of Uzbekistan's cultural practice of polygyny was claimed to cause groups of low status men to be forced into involuntary celibacy. Today, the term is somewhat widespread, owing notoriety to figures such as Elliot Rodgers, Alec Minassian, and Chris Harper Mercer. Violent acts of frustrated, outcast young men have brought the incelosphere, as it were, to the attention of the media, which seem more than happy to paint the entirety of incels under the brush of violent, right-wing, white ethno-nationalist extremism. However, this does not seem to be the case for most who would call themselves incels.
I I'm depressed from being forever alone. I'm dwelling on it, even though I know I shouldn't.
One such issue among East Asians is a result of China's one-child policy, which caused men to outnumber women in severe ratios in certain areas of the nation. Preferences for sons in other nations has caused the rise of involuntary celibacy as well. Abortions of female infants in India, as well as areas within the Middle East and Africa, have caused women to become somewhat scarce when compared to their male counterparts. In Japan, modernity and rising costs of living are to blame, with a quarter of all adults reporting no sexual activity well into their 30s, let alone dating or plans for marriage or reproduction. Things aren't going quite as well in Europe either, with German incels, otherwise known as absolute beginners, growing in prevalence from 19% of men to 27% since 2005. Especially in the US, where racial demarcations are most apparent, the concept that inceldom is a primarily white issue is largely overstated, with the vast majority of American incels being of Hispanic or African descent. But what really is an incel? Other than the idea of sexlessness and lack of relationship experience, how do these individuals differ from the average individual? Do they even differ at all? Here are a few subsets that explain, at least in part, how this can be. Cultural norms regarding attractive features and race can be a factor, with data showing that African and South Asian men receive the least responses on online dating apps. These individuals may be known respectively as black cells or curry cells. Men who are shy and lack aggressive traits are known as shy cells. Men with mental disabilities or who suffer from autism or Asperger's might be known as autism cells amongst those in the incelosphere. Women who avoid sexual activity due to sexual trauma, medical reasons, or reasons akin to those previously mentioned are usually known as femme cells. For whatever flaw or trait that exists, there is an attributed cell suffix. There is no single type of incel, just as there is no single type of person. Loneliness and longing are things that all humans are capable of, but not something that all humans are capable of alleviating. In order to facilitate my research, I turned to a close friend studying sociological aspects of terrorism and ostracization in order to determine whether or not incels were actually a threat to society.
So if you're asking me, do I think people who are consistently rejected by society and don't feel love in their life, if there's a odds that they will be more mentally unstable, absolutely, yes, definitely. People who are hermits, people who feel that they're being sort of hated by the world around them are definitely more likely to engage in this sort of stuff, but not for ideological reasons, because there is no real ideology. If that makes sense. So yes, are people who are lonely and feel hated, will they be more likely to do things that are violent? Yes, but I think that's kind of always been the case.
With John's testimony, one could consider that the term incel, which reduces a person's value to their number of sexual partners, is akin to the term slut, used to disparage women in a similar, slightly different fashion. Both reinforce harmful sex-negative cultural norms and reduce an individual to a base level, typically regarding something that is either untrue or out of their control. So how do real incels cope with their situation? Some throw themselves into self-improvement, prioritizing education or physical training in order to look max or wage max. Others pay for escort services and often argue for the legalization of prostitution in their communities. Others even escape into niche hobbies, such as anime, computer programming, art, mechanics, or other avenues of self-expression in line with Freud's theory of sublimation. Incels will also join online communities to lean on one another for support, but the recent vilification of the term has caused many communities to be dropped by service providers or forum platforms. Reddit itself has banned incel communities since before 2020, and others seldom last due to a lack of cohesiveness of authority in matters of administration or low numbers of users. So, they go to Discord. there is no hard answer to whether or not there is a cure for incels. It's even harder to determine what exactly causes inceldom in the first place. With exceptions to every rule existing that I've previously stated for their existence, is it confidence? Or looks? Income? Anxiety? There's no one answer, and if there is, it might not be any of those. But perhaps the answer is simply compassion.
Do you want a joke answer or a real answer?
I would prefer a real answer, to be honest with you.
Okay, then I would say definitely.
You know, like one that'll really explain your position and your true feelings. Like, think back on all the things that we've talked about over the last 20 questions that I've given you, and something that'll really give people an idea of what the quote unquote incel movement or incel status is about.
I would definitely say it is the current term for incel. The way it is viewed is definitely bastardized.
Okay.
It's taken a term and completely changed the meaning of it to be nothing like it originally was.
What would you say to the American public if you had the opportunity?
Stop being so annoying. Fuck off. Learn to tolerate each other's bullshit, and the bullshit will go away.
I feel bad for incels, but I feel that a lot of the time, they do put themselves in this situation and they're not willing to help themselves.
Can you give me
So,
like an example, perhaps?
like, there's been plenty of times where someone says, "Oh, I got these problems. I don't have a job, or I'm not in university. I don't have any money. I live with my parents. I can't drive." And you try and say, "Have you thought about doing things this way, this way, this way?" And they're just like, give you a million reasons why that would never be possible.
Okay, so there's a lot of excuses being made.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of excuses, and for the people who have they've got jobs or they go to university and they're still an incel, that's when it, like, especially if they've got quite a few good qualities, that's when it, I struggle to understand why that's the case.
I agree. And I think it comes to, like, not to interject, but I think it comes to, like, you can be pitiful or you can be powerful, but you can't be both of them. And so a lot of them get stuck in that pitiful cycle. But there's some that are just, I don't know what the issue is, and I feel really bad because they clearly are trying to put an effort to be a better person, right? And to work on themselves in the ways that they think, okay, I dress nicer. I'm going to try and get a higher paying job. I'm going to try to practice my conversational skills. And it just doesn't work out for them. Women or men or what have you are just not interested in them. And it's just consistent rejection.